And then you bring it out of me.
Dynamic. Because I'm in my head usually, and I'm learning more and more. Like, I'll just have like aha moments, like sitting down in the hot tub, being all bougie. Like, I'll be sitting there, I'm just like, literally, I'm in my head like a lot of times. And I'm thinking about, I'm realizing like, yeah, I already knew that, but then I'm realizing now like how often like that is. Like, I'm in my head.
How often you're in your head?
Yeah, across different contexts.
That's always the important step in growing is being like, holy shit, this is like all the fucking time. And you don't realize it until you realize it. And then it starts to go down.
Yeah. And the thing is like, I'll start to assume, I've realized there's so many like thoughts I'll have that of what makes a performance good or what's good or bad.
Yeah.
And it's all stuff that involves in here. And so it's the very process itself is like in my head. And I'm like, oh, this went good because of this, and this thought that I had. And this went bad because this, and that.
We're recording. You just might want to move your microphone a little bit more centered.
Like that?
Yeah, when you're speaking around, you're just like a little bit off to the left of it. So.
God, you're so bad at this.
Yeah, I am. I'm like the Mendez brother. Like that?
Well, like, talk like as if you're speaking to him. See how it's like sort of off to the side?
Oh, when I look at him.
Yeah, put it right in front of your face hole.
Good way to put it. How's that?
Well, yeah, there. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
More centered. There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, let me finish my thought, and then we'll just have this be the beginning part.
All right, let's do it.
No, because I was thinking about how to start this, and in the shower. Well, I wasn't thinking about it, but I had this shower thought of how to like, of just words, and then I was like, oh, that would be a good intro. But then today, I was like super excited to talk about this because my background's personality disorder stuff, and I'm just like, I'm a little too excited for this episode. Like the other episodes, I was kind of like, fuck it. I got like 1,000 followers. Who gives a shit? But this one, I'm like, it's like my background, my area of expertise. So then I started getting in my head a little bit more. And then I just had to remind myself like the good stuff does not come from this. It comes from a deeper foundation. You kind of just have to trust it comes out.
Yeah, it comes from the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful for me to think too.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
Let me do the intro.
Do the intro, dude. Because I was about to just drop like a random meme.
drop it.
No, you're like the Michael Jordan meme where they're just like, and then things became personal. That's when it became personal. We talked about narcissism. Go ahead. I'm sure half people didn't get that, but go ahead.
And I feel like people know that one. But yeah, so my welcome to episode 6 of
6.
Two Dudes Talking Therapy. This episode's on narcissism. And I was just saying a second ago that I was excited to talk about this because my background's in personality disorders. And, I had just like a little thing I thought of. So I was going to try and repeat whatever I could remember about that. So basically, personality disorder is a very unique kind of flavor of disorder. You would agree, right? Like It's like when people think of psychology, they usually, for the most part, think of anxiety and depression disorders, stuff in that world are a lot more common than personality disorders. And they have a different flavor too. And my background's in personality disorders. I studied borderline personality disorder for 5 years in my PhD. And I also was trained in dialectical behavior therapy, which is like the BPD treatment, right? And narcissism is kind of like the cousin of BPD. They're in the same cluster of personality disorders. So why does the flavor feel so different? Well, because the root of personality disorders is different than the root of anxiety and depressive disorders. So like anxiety and depressive disorders, the root of them is uncertainty is hard to navigate, and our mind is trying to navigate it by solving that problem. So it solves the problem with anxiety by trying to control things beyond what's appropriate, right? And it solves that problem with depression by trying to control things by acting like you have no control. So it's basically like, how does my mind mess with me to change the way I view control in my world? That's kind of how anxiety and depression form. But the root of personality disorders is not one related to uncertainty, but inadequacy. So like feelings of shame, identity, that's where personality disorders come from. And the reason why it's got such a different flavor is that personality disorders, they try to solve for feelings of shame, not with control, but with responsibility. So like someone with BPD takes on too much blame. That's their way of trying to navigate feelings of shame, feelings of not being enough. It's like, I'm going to blame myself for everything as a way to kind of get around this sense of not feeling good enough. Whereas narcissism is the exact opposite. It's like a shedding of responsibility. If people with BPD take on too much responsibility, people with NPD take on not enough. And so this lack of accountability is kind of like the major characteristic and how they kind of navigate this feeling of not feeling enough, of not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That does. That makes perfect sense. Like that distinction, because I think people can get really caught up with thinking, well, where does, narcissistic personality disorder come from? What is narcissism and all that? And I think it really is rooted way back, and that's one of the characteristics of it. And you listed off like, yeah, there's that grandiosity associated with it. There's the sense of entitlement, and there's the biggest part, which I think people hate about narcissists the most, is the lack of accountability. And that's just the part that stops them from ever being able to grow. But I like what you said about the difference. Like, I think a lot of people don't assume that narcissists start from a place of unhappiness. But based on what you said, it starts in this place of like, I'm dealing with something negative and I'm coping in this direction. It's not this pure energy of like, I'm just starting off as like perfect. Like I'm entitled and I'm perfect. It starts off as a coping mechanism of away from something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like if people with BPD, people with BPD and NPD, they have this like wound of shame and like deep down, I'm not enough, right? But people with BPD, they deal with that wound by poking it. They're like, it hurts. People with NPD deal with it by ignoring it. They're like, what wounds? And you're like, it's right fucking there. Like, and look at all the ways in which it's influencing your life. And they're like, not my problem. They externalize all of the ways in which things go wrong as not their fault. And it's a way to protect themselves from ever feeling that pain of not being enough or whatever. Mm-hmm. The identity stuff.
Yeah. And I think that points out a really good misconception about, narcissistic personality disorder. Because when most people run into a narcissist, they're pissed and they're like, this person has everything they want. They get everything they want. They're happy. They're not depressed. But if you look at the research, narcissists are depressed.
They're miserable.
They're miserable.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have much going on about being happy. And like I said at a previous episode, they're decorating their cage. They are literally ignoring the corrective experiences of reality. And so the trial and error experience that's supposed to be there when it comes to accountability, oh, look, there's a wall. Don't walk into it. Go through the door. They just walk into the wall and they say, the wall's the problem. So I'm going to stay here. And they never move. Mm-hmm. And then they look like this undeveloped child. And I think there's this childlike nature of narcissists. And I think that's why, because they're so immature and they actually are suffering. They are suffering, not from like a pity kind of stance, I'm saying that, more so from a sense of they are suffering and they need people to poke at them and say, you are the problem. They need that lack of pity.
Well, and they're suffering, but you'll never know it because the most important thing for someone who's narcissistic is the image that they present out into the world. The image that they present out into the world is the only thing they care about. And how they actually feel or what's going on the inside is not really the way they form their identity. But it's also like the fatal flaw of their identity, because if your identity comes from the outside in, if your identity starts on Instagram and ends at home, it's going in the wrong direction. It has to start internally and kind of manifest from that. They're trying to reverse engineer an identity, and it doesn't work. It's like building a house on sand. Like it's never going to be a long-term solution to a problem of I don't know who I am.
Yeah. And this is kind of get into the territory of one question I actually had pre-created for you. But I mean, what is narcissism and how is it different than narcissistic personality disorder? Like those are two different things, right? And we put them together so often. What do you think about that?
Well, I feel like it's the question of like, at what point, it's like narcissistic traits exist on a spectrum of intensity. Like we all, and this is something that a narcissist usually uses as a defense if you ever try and call them out. It's like, well, you do that too. It's like, yeah, we're all self-absorbed to some extent, but when you're self-absorbed to an extent where you have no empathy for anyone else, your entire world exists to satisfy your needs, even if it's at the expense of others, then it starts to become narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic traits kind of can happen to all of us. Like, for instance, someone who has a difficult time taking accountability, that's a narcissistic trait, but that doesn't mean that they can't grow and work on that and reflect on the way their behavior influences others and no longer have that trait in the future. So that's the difference. It's like the intensity and the impact it has on others, I think, is the best way to measure it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I mean, before I say what I like what you said too, of like the trait thing and how it's a spectrum and how narcissists use it as a weapon a lot.
Yeah,
I'm
they
like,
do.
that's so true. Because then they're like, if you're an empath, right? You're with a narcissist, you're an empath, and you have so much like reflecting neurons of like being concerned about them, and they accuse you of something, you're going to hyperfixate on what you did wrong rather than focus on what the narcissist did wrong. And maybe that's something we get into during the talk, but I just love noticing those things because I think people need that information of like narcissists, they weaponize a whole lot. One tiny speck in you that actually is a log in your eye, which is a scripture.
Of course it is. I know that one. But, you know, you said empathy, so it just kind of triggered this thought. But one of the things that people that only have experienced it can truly attest to is that narcissistic people are thieves of your empathy. They're empathy thieves. And by that, I mean, most people, when you are in a difficult spot, like for instance, do you remember when I had that kidney stone and I was in the hospital and the best dude in the world sent me a gift certificate to get ramen? It's the sweetest man on earth. But like, it's just a natural thing to empathize with someone when they're going through some shit, right? Which you did. But the difference is, right, someone that's narcissistic, they're not going to kind of cross their fingers and hope they get that ramen gift certificate. They're going to pull it out of you. They're going to make sure that they get your empathy by pulling and manipulating feelings of guilt and presenting themselves as victims where, oh my God, look at all this stuff that happens to me. And it draws your empathy in when you otherwise might not have been as empathetic.
Yeah. Wow. 100%. Empathy thieves. And I think that's really important too, because
It's a great name for this episode.
yes, empathy thieves.
I don't have much empathy for people with narcissism. I have a
Yeah.
lot of empathy for people with borderline personality disorder. That's like my soft spot.
I
But
see.
empathy thieves. That's how I feel. I don't know.
I mean, I like that we keep going back to like BPD, borderline personality disorder versus narcissism. Because I think with, borderline personality disorder, there's this high level of emotional attunement. Your emotions are a hand grenade, where for other people, it might be a small firework. But with narcissism, it's completely different. And so with borderline personality disorder, you're coping with so much at once, and you're either needing to invalidate that because people are telling you it's too much, or you're invalidating yourself because you feel like it's too much, and then that becomes a curse. And so when you keep on suppressing that energy that goes into it is so difficult. And most people on the outside don't get that picture. They just think that you're being dramatic or too much. But with narcissism, it's the complete opposite, where you're presenting yourself in a way to the world where you're trying to show the best possible colors. And it's the complete flip with like borderline personality disorder. So it makes sense to
100%.
me.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
you
go.
get me excited. People with BPD have an excessive amount of empathy. So much so that they don't know what to do with it. And it kind of messes with them so that they feel kind of pulled in every direction all the time, like the current is taking them. Whereas people with narcissism have not enough empathy. And I feel like that's the biggest schism between the two disorders.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. I think something else that's important is to lay out the difference between, or just to understand a definition of narcissism. Because as of late, it seems like everybody that people don't like is now classified as a narcissist. And it's a problem because we now are sort of like blurring the lines of like what to classify someone as a narcissist versus not. And so you look on social media or you look at somebody in a relationship and they've had 20 relationships, and they say, I've only been with narcissists. And as a reminder, one of the traits of a narcissist is to project your own issues to the world.
I was just thinking that.
So it's very likely if you have a kind of high level of entitlement and people have told you that, and yet every relationship that you've been in has been with a narcissist, it's very likely that you haven't been in relationships with a narcissist, that you're the narcissist. But, if we don't get these definitions right, we start to make that a lot easier for the narcissist to kind of hide behind these lines. And then also it's invalidating for people who are actually in relationship with narcissists. When in reality, it's important for us to try to push to figure out, well, what's the real issue in relationships? And so it's really important that you be very careful before you start just labeling people as narcissists, especially nowadays. I think it's just everywhere.
So let's give the list. Let's list obviously, based on our conceptualization, these people deep down have tons of shame that they're unwilling to acknowledge. But the way that's very abstract and conceptual. What it feels like to be around someone like this is not going to be that. It's going to be the way that manifests in their interpersonal world. So the way that manifests in their interpersonal world, we can just keep going back and forth on traits. But you said one, so I'm going to steal it, and then you go.
Yeah.
One trait is a significant amount of entitlement in their life.
Yeah, 100%. Complete lack of taking responsibility, a lack of accountability, and using that as a weapon against the people around them. So if you're working or you're dealing with a narcissist, it's very likely that you're always the bad guy. And it's also very likely that you have a lot of empathy because narcissists often prey on people who don't have a whole lot of empathy.
100%. And similar to not taking accountability, lacking in remorse and lacking in empathy, emotional immaturity.
Yeah, 100%. I say 100% a lot.
What else?
Grandiosity, which is kind of wrapped up in, entitlement. They feel this grandiose sense, like they fantasize about wealth and power, and because they feel like they're worthy of that, which that's why it kind of wraps into entitlement.
Grandiosity, and then to add on to that, a real fixation on the way they are viewed in their external world. So like a lot of image-based behaviors, has to have a nice car, has to look good, you don't want people knowing about your business, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. They have to be, and piggybacking off of that, the center of attention. And if they're not, there's going to be some issue. They might black and white the whole situation. Like if they're not the center of attention at a party, they're going to be in the corner doing their own thing until they get noticed.
I think that's good. That's a good start.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess we can shift now into one of the buzz questions of like, well, what do you do if you're with a narcissist? I feel like there's a lot of people that go on social media and they're trying to figure it out. One, like I said before, it's important to figure out if you're actually in a relationship with a narcissist based on like what we talked about before. But two, you're already in a relationship with a narcissist. What do you do at that point?
This is I don't think from her, but this is who I heard it from. Shout out Dr. Ramani. She's on YouTube and she's a psychologist, and she has a whole episode on gray rocking, which is like this phrase basically being a gray rock in their life, meaning you're not kind of instigating any conflict, but you're also not engaging with them on a deeper level. You're just kind of like not giving them any narcissistic supply so that they eventually stop coming to you for this thing that they're looking to take from you, which is your empathy and your attention and all that stuff. I mean, that's like in the short term. But if you did the work and you're really like, this person is narcissistic and it's beyond fixable, then the real question is, if you can remove yourself from that situation and you're not, what's going on with your self-worth,
Yeah. Bingo. And just to kind of go back to that gray rock thing, because I hadn't heard that before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What does that look like practically? Like maybe it could even be like a brief like role play. Like how can you be a gray rock in a relationship with a narcissist if that's you?
So, well, I mean, I feel like if you're in a relationship with someone that is narcissistic, like the end game is to, I think the spell that a narcissistic person casts over people in their life is this reorienting what your values are. Like our values are, when you go to a restaurant, your value is to eat some good food that tastes good, right? But let's say you go to a restaurant and the food isn't that great, but the chef is really trying to convince you it's good, right? And it's like, no, you actually did enjoy this, right? So all of a sudden, the orientation of what matters to you goes from your bodily sensation, like kind of your raw experience. Now it's going to up in your brain. And in your brain, you're kind of like, was it good? You know, there's this seed of doubt that gets planted. And someone in a narcissistic relationship often undergoes that transformation of like, I know I like this. I'm like, you do? It doesn't seem like you like it. You seem miserable.
Yeah.
No, they told me I liked it. Yeah. I like this meal.
I believe them. Yeah. And this is such a good point too, because like, this is going to sound like a little bit of a backtrack of what I said before, but it is possible that there's something about you that is drawing narcissists towards you. It's not that you might be someone with, that's why I mentioned earlier, it's likely you might have a higher sense of entitlement and you're running into, that means you're the narcissist. But in this case, like I have clients come up to me and say, well, this is my third narcissistic partner. Why do I keep ending up with narcissists? And it's a good question because narcissists only make up like, I don't know, 1 to 5% of the population. So there's something happening there. And one of the things that I'll say is like, well, let's check in like with who you are, because it's very likely that if narcissists are tracking you down, because that's what's happening, they are looking for people who are very other oriented, because narcissists prey on, oftentimes unconsciously, because narcissists aren't as smart as we think all the time. They don't learn from their experiences. Narcissists unconsciously prey on people who are empaths, people pleasers, people who are anxiously attached. And why? Well, it's because people who are anxiously attached empaths, they prioritize and have a deep respect for the wants and needs of others over their own. So what happens when you run into a narcissist who has a deep core belief that their needs are worthy of respect above everyone else, accepting that they have the identity of God without all the qualifications. Mm-hmm. They feel perfectly at home when they run into an empath. They feel like, oh, wait, this is a room I can actually see. This is a person who reflects in me the character that I want. And then I would even say on the other side, empaths can be drawn to narcissists because they also validate the reality of the empath. It's like you get this almost this sense of euphoria for wanting to finally meet the needs of someone because they desperately need you. And so I think they kind of validate each other. And like that analogy you used with the restaurant, empaths are just the most susceptible to being brainwashed really quickly. Like you really did enjoy this experience, as the narcissist might say. And because the empath is so good at reading the needs of others and so bad at reading their own needs sometimes, it's much easier for them to be convinced that, oh, hey, the narcissist is right.
Narcissists are so good at sowing doubt into your own mind.
Yeah.
Because narcissists prey upon the unspoken social fabric that keeps society together. And by that, I mean, they prey upon this understanding that we're going to have a conversation in good faith. Like if we both see a car accident, we're going to go, remember that car accident? Like we both witnessed it, right? But someone that's narcissistic is going to, they're fixated. So this is another thing about narcissists. Narcissists are fixated on narratives. They care much more about the way the story is curated than what actually transpired. And so that, I mean, like the second there's a conflict with the narcissist, or the second some conflict is anticipated, their wheels start spinning. They're like, how do I develop a narrative that has enough elements of truth that paints me in a positive light? And so they're always kind of thinking in those terms because they're always trying to fix this image of themselves, even if the experience is not the same. Even if the food's bad, I still want you walking out of this restaurant giving me 5 stars.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, reality becomes a suggestion.
Oh, here's a
That's our next book title.
Here's a relevant thing. So there's a TikTok that I just saw. It's this like track star, and they, you know, how, like they hold batons. This track star is running next to this other track athlete, and she literally bashes this athlete on the head with her baton, and the athlete falls to the ground and has like skull damage, right? So I saw this morning, and then this afternoon I saw an interview with this girl who's being accused of assault, and she's basically saying that's not what happened, it was accidental. And you're watching the actual video, and you're like, that's not what I'm seeing. It seems pretty intentional to me. Looks like there's a lot of intent behind your actions. But and I'm not making an assessment of her personality disorder if she has one, but it's the kind of behavior of someone where it's like what you're seeing is not what's happening. And that little bit of doubt, if you're susceptible to it, is going to like be a foot in the door of manipulation for you in the future. And it's just so frustrating that you can never kind of get a straight answer out of someone like this.
Yeah. They just play with reality so well. And that's just their go-to. It's automatic at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good reason why if you are trying to navigate a relationship with a narcissist, you have to be mindful. You have to be on your toes, and you have to get the facts straight. Because like you said, they're going to twist and turn the narrative so often. So if you even wince or move just a little bit to their direction when they're telling their narrative and their side of the story, then they're going to just use that to keep getting more ground. So you have to be very matter-of-factly and say, that is not what happened. These are the facts. And then they're going to try to redirect you. And then you use the technique in DBT called the broken record. You say, I hear you. You don't even have to say I hear you, but that's nice to say. I hear you, and insert fact of what actually happened. And then you keep doing that over and over and over again. But I think one of the issues for people trying to deal with narcissists is that they feel like they have to go along with the narcissist story because they're so persistent and they seem so convicted. So if the narcissist is very convicted and is pulling you in that direction and they just keep saying, hey, hear my point, you almost feel like you have to because you know that you would never push that hard unless you were telling the truth. It's like if you see someone just yelling and trying to tell you like, hey, this is reality. Like you almost want to believe them, or you do believe them because there's just no way that you would be that indignant if you were actually lying about that. And narcissists believe their lies.
That's the beauty of the disorder. It is the most like protected in a safe disorder because written in the software code is impenetrable. I'm getting beyond my technological know-how. Their software has an impenetrable code, which is do not reflect on how your behavior influences others. If that never happens, then they can never grow and they remain protected, and they use all of their defenses to remain protected. But what you said a second ago really reminds me of like with narcissistic people, when you're having a disagreement with them, there's this assumption that if you don't go along with them, then it's just going to create more conflict, right? And so a lot of times people who deep down know they're right have to give up or let it go, despite the fact that they know they're right, simply because the fabric of that relationship is based on the conditionality of you have to go along with me, and I won't be the car alarm that conditions you into whatever. Like I always think of narcissistic people. Their main way of conditioning others into submission is the same way a car alarm conditions others into submission. It's not so much that when it goes off, someone's in danger or your car is getting broken into. It's just that when it goes off, it's so fucking annoying that all you can think of is whose fucking car is this? Someone turn that off. And every other need becomes secondary to turning off that unpleasant experience. And that's kind of weaponized against people in such a way where they're like, okay, I know I have needs. I know that my emotional needs are not being met, but right now they've just amped it up to a point where I need to deal with this first.
Yeah. And how much louder is that car alarm when you have intense levels of empathy?
and that's the biggest factor. It's not even about the car alarm going off. It's about it might go off under these circumstances, and me being an empathetic person, I know we're right on the edge. I can feel it. And so I have to pull back.
Yep. When you say right on the edge, you mean you're getting to the point where it's like you're about to explode. You're about to hit rock bottom.
There's always this like calm before the storm with a narcissistic person. Their behavior changes. They get emotionally withdrawn. They stop texting or whatever, and you just know that something bad is about to happen. And that's when someone in relationship with a narcissist really anxiously reacts and goes like, what do you need? How do I fix this? Even if they don't actually think they did anything wrong. I mean, that's the biggest trick a narcissist pulls. A narcissist is able to incept a person into feeling guilt, even though they did nothing wrong.
Yes, that's perfectly said. And I mean, that's when and this is why this is so important. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you have to learn how to turn off the messages from your empathy. Because really, when you're with the narcissist, your empathic receptors are lying to you. It's simply just not true that they're feeling what they're expressing to you. Because if you're an empath or you're someone who has deep wells of emotional attunement and you're looking at a narcissist crying, everything inside of you is telling you, boy, I would never cry like that unless it was serious. Or everything. And so I like this analogy whenever I'm working with someone that's trying to get out of a situation with a narcissist. But imagine you're in a courtroom, right? You are someone who just got hurt by this narcissist. They physically hurt you, and now you're in court. And you are someone is watching from the outside. They're like the people. What's the people in the crowd? The jury.
The jury.
So there's the jury there, and they witness you two. You've just been hurt by this narcissist, and then the narcissistic person who just abused you is there. What do you think is going to happen when the narcissist is standing there feeling completely confused and angry for being pulled into court and feeling like, why am I even here? And in fact, they might even accuse you of hurting them. And then you...
They usually will.
They usually will, yes, exactly. And then you, the empath, you're there and you're like, wait a minute, did I actually get hurt? Am I right to have drawn all these people into court? And you start to feel guilty. So you look guilty and the narcissist looks angry and like everything in life is unfair. A lot of times the empath goes to jail or they suffer the consequences because the world on the outside sees the picture of what's actually happening. They see that you are listening to a lie, which is your empathy. And then the narcissist is expressing a lie, which is that they were right, you know?
And that is why oftentimes the solution to dealing with this trap is being the villain. If narcissists are all about creating narratives, then the only way you're stuck is by trying to still be a hero in their narrative. And the only way you escape and are free is if you stop trying to be a hero and just accept the villain role for what it is, which is you're not feeding their bullshit anymore. But from their eyes, obviously, they're going to paint it differently. But the other thing you were saying with the courtroom, it's like this is what I was saying about the social. Hold on. Let me just collect my thought.
Yeah, take your time.
This is what they like. The social fabric that they take advantage of is the fabric of when someone's sad, they cry. When someone's hurt, they express that they're hurt. When they're angry, they express that they're angry. Like that's what we just assume all humans act in circumstances where it requires it. But with a narcissistic person, the ways in which they're presenting their emotions is always a strategic way because it's always public facing. They're never going to present how they actually feel unless it is advantageous to do so. You know what I mean? So if they're crying in a courtroom, it's because they're trying to evoke empathy. And if they're not crying, it's because they're trying to present some other image that they want other people to see. And it's not like they're psychopaths. You know, like I think like you can hear this and go, oh, they sound like psychopaths. No. they're not consciously choosing this. I always, if you want to go to analogies, your analogy to the courtroom, my analogy is I think narcissistic people are kind of like bears, like bears that are just eating an animal alive without any care for the animal's experience. The bear's not choosing to do it. It's also not really completely aware of the instincts and drives it has. It just does. Bears just bear. When a narcissistic person is backed in a corner, they're going to blame you. They're going to lash out. When a narcissistic person feels like they need support and comfort, they're going to act victimized in your presence. It's all just bear-like activity from someone who's not choosing any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're trying to understand a narcissist, don't try to use any other rationality besides they push this button because it worked, and they didn't push this button because they knew it wouldn't work.
Conditioning. And this is one of the deeper things too with narcissists is like over time, the way they condition people into accepting mistreatment is by treating them poorly and acting like nothing was wrong. So like, for instance, if I'm a narcissistic person and you're my friend and I don't show up to your birthday when you ask me about it, I say, well, you're just kind of like, you're so needy. Like, what's wrong with you? Right. So I just like kind of double hit you there. Right. But I say that. And then tomorrow I'm going to text you and go, hey, so what's up? Right. And it's the, hey, so what's up? Acting like nothing's wrong that conditions you into accepting that this is just normal. Wow. And now I put the responsibility on you to make a problem out of something that I'm not considering a problem. And then once you do, if you do, I'm going to paint you as the bad guy. And if you don't, you're going to comply in my system that's slowly going to make you not advocate for yourself at all.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I mean, just think about what happens, just to add on to that. You start to lose reality testing ability, and you start to look just like the narcissist in terms of reality testing. They slowly start to get you to doubt yourself so much that you feel like the crazy person.
Your mind of the person who was actually hurt gets replaced by my mind. You're like, well, Vinny doesn't think it's a problem. It's like, well, who cares what I think? What do you think? Yeah. And a lot of times working on narcissistic abuse and the impacts of that is starting to ask yourself, like, how do I actually feel about this situation independent of how they feel?
Yeah. Yeah. That's but it's just, I mean, even just talking about it is so sad. It's so sad
fucked.
What happens to people who are with narcissists.
It's a slow boil.
This is a little random, but I think that piggybacking on what you're saying, narcissists are, a lot of people would assume that narcissists end up mostly with anxiously attached people. And I think they do. But I also can see that narcissists end up with a lot of avoidantly attached people that lean more avoidant. And I say that because with avoidant attachment, you think about what they do. They minimize their own concerns. They take excessive amounts of responsibility. And they are similar to the narcissist other blaming, right? So they don't play the game of the narcissist a whole lot. And yet, if you're someone with avoidant attachment that feels like you need to be the hero and save the day and carry the weight of the world, you start to see a narcissist expressing sadness, and you think, well, I would never express sadness unless I was at a 95 in terms of intensity. And then you start to think, wow, this is just someone who's just like me as the avoidant person, and they're just really struggling and they've hit rock bottom. And I believe it. You don't realize as the avoidant person that this narcissist is actually just using that as a pawn, a button to press, to make people think that they're actually at a 95 in terms of emotional intensity. Because you just think, how and why would someone want to look sad? And then you have
if they aren't sad.
If they aren't sad.
That's the fabric of society. You're like, you have to actually question that now?
Yeah, exactly. Like, wait, this person is
not
threatening
sad?
Self-harm. In fact, they're actually engaging in self-harm to kind of win you back over.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like they'll push whatever button it takes in the moment.
That's what it is there. And I think you're right. Like, whether they're anxious, they're probably more anxious, but avoidant people too, because if there's a string to pull and someone with anxious attachment or avoidant attachment has fear of abandonment at its core, there's the string to pull. They're going to pull on it. And really one of the biggest signs of someone developing an unhealthy narcissistic relationship is the narcissistic person starts to foster a dependency on them. You know, a narcissistic person never wants someone in their life to feel more independent, because the second they start to feel more independent is the second their relationship is threatened.
Yeah.
So their sense of security requires the people around them to stay in a situation even if they don't like it. I want you to come back to this restaurant even if you don't like the food. That's comforting to me. Actually, it's more comforting than if you like the food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a gesture. And these people all live very much in the world of abstract gestures. I need you to show me your allegiance. I need your loyalty to supersede any of your own self-worth. And that's the way we stay close.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also why narcissists are paranoid, because a lot of narcissists are so used to twisting the narrative, twisting reality. So the moment they run into somebody that doesn't closely resemble an empath, they either steer clear or demonize them and say, this person is not only not fitting my narrative, but they're out to get me. So a lot of narcissists will quickly just feel like this person tried to poison my food when I was in the bathroom, so they won't drink it. You might not hear about that story, but lots of narcissists they'll be so paranoid because they know that they're thinking 8 steps ahead about how to twist the narrative. So why on earth would someone genuinely want to do something good for them unless there was some catch, especially if there's somebody that they're talking to with a lot of self-respect?
This is what I did my dissertation on, which is mentalization, which is like understanding the mental states of yourself and others. But what you're saying is a big issue that illustrates the failure of thinking of a narcissist, which is, I'm thinking like this. So whether or not you're telling me you're thinking like this, I know you're also thinking like this. Either you're thinking like me and you're hiding it, but you have to hide it, or you're not thinking like me and you're naive. But either way, I'm the one who's going to get the leverage here. And it's and when like someone that's genuinely giving and genuinely kind interacts with a narcissist looks at them like they're handing them Monopoly money. They're like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, that's good.
They're like, what?
What is this thing? The acorns?
It's like a squirrel finding like a fake nut and like picking it up and going, what? And then just dropping it. Like they have no use for it.
Yeah. Like, why are you? And this is another thing. Narcissists are often jealous of people who are empathic secretly. Like they might be jealous of you and you don't even know it because you're handing them something that they think is not important. Like the narcissist thinks, how can you be in the background at a party and feel okay about that? How can you authentically give me something that's self-sacrificial, and yet for whatever reason your relationships are still flourishing? How are your relationships flourishing more than mine? And I'm a narcissist who's always putting effort and work into being the center of attention. Well, it's because the glue that holds relationships together to the narcissist is dominance, entitlement. And once they see someone who's not feeding on all those things and yet their relationships are thriving, then they get frustrated. They feel like something's wrong with reality. They come up with some excuse as to why that's happening. And then they feed even harder on it. And they say, well, I'm just going to feed more on this thing that's giving me this identity, this self-worth, while you don't eat any of it. And I'm going to keep doing this until I prove that your way of life is wrong and mine is right, until the narcissist hits rock bottom. And then they eliminate themselves from your life because they feel like, well, I can't prove this thing to be wrong. But I think that's more because narcissists aren't going to tell people that, you know, but they actually do feel jealous of the kind and authentic person's world sometimes.
Well, I think if anything triggers their sense of inadequacy, which they are very good at not really feeling, it's going to be the authentic, kind person, because it just kind of reminds them that there is another way to live. It feels real. They'll try and convince themselves like, yeah, you know, they seem nice, but I'm sure they're, you know, cheating on their spouse behind closed doors. They'll have to create some false narrative about this person to kind of poke holes in their persona. But in reality, when someone's real and authentic, it's palpable and it triggers their sense of inadequacy and shame to an extent that they really just have to distance themselves from that person.
Yeah. Yeah. Question for you.
Yeah.
what specific?
I have no questions for you. Does it make me like a shitty co-host to not have questions for you?
No. This is actually a subject that I trust you a bit more on.
Okay.
So I feel more comfortable. But if random questions pop up, by all means. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. But like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that struggle with they're in a relationship with a narcissist, and they actually want to stay in some ways. Like they get euphoria from being with them, and they can't leave, and yet they know they have to. What are some practical ways, or what practical tips would you give to someone that wants to leave a narcissist but they feel like they can't?
I'm going to answer this in a way that a lot of my clients like kind of roll their eyes because it's like in an analogy. But
Yeah.
like, okay, so you're going to this restaurant, you know the food's bad, but you keep going back to the restaurant. I would argue, and the question is why do I keep going back to this restaurant? How much are you fully allowing yourself to taste the bad food? You know, like there's always a level of self-delusion that is required for you to stay in relationship with a narcissist. There's always a level of self-delusion. So in order to undo that self-delusion, you're going to have to start grounding yourself in your actual experience and taking away that kind of narrative, abstract thought, belief stuff that has been imposed on you by them. And what that looks like is going to be different for each person. But at the end of the day, it's about allowing your taste buds to tell you information. You know, like
Yeah.
for instance, let's say it's like a relative or friend and you talk to them once a week, right? I would say the next time you talk to them, before you talk to them on the phone, check in with how you're feeling. And after the phone call is over, check in with how you're feeling. And 99% of the time, they'll come back and report to me, oh, yeah, I feel way worse afterwards, actually. I'm like, I wonder what your taste buds are telling you.
Right.
You know, like that's just one example of the path you have to take, because I think what drives me fucking nuts about psychology and like TikTok social psychology bullshit is that everyone's like, you have to let them, or like eat healthy or meditate. It's like everyone's saying what to do, but no one's explaining kind of how to get to a point of doing it.
Yeah, it's the fires. It's not the actual problem internally. Like a lot of times people are wanting, give me the steps, give me the roadmap behaviorally, how to get out of this thing. When really something needs to shift internal first.
Yes.
There's some Jungian shadow work that needs to happen.
Why isn't it shifting? Oh, I'm deluding myself. I'm not engaging with a more embodied sense of experience, and therefore I'm not picking up on how unpleasant this is, right? That's the theme of what it is.
Yep.
But anyway,
Yeah.
what would you say to a client if, for instance, they came into a session and said the exact same thing, like, hey, I know I have to do something about this, but I can't.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes like to I like to take a little bit of the cognitive route and then also the deep work. So I'll start cognitive with one thought. So like if you're with a narcissist and you have a hard time leaving, I think you have to realize that they are extremely convincing and that a lot of the things that you're picking up on reality is not actually reality. So I like this analogy. We both use just analogies. But I mean, this is the difference between a narcissist and a normal person. So a normal person gets like an 80% on their exam. They have to write a part, they have to do a prompt, and they go to the teacher and they submit the paper to the teacher and they're like, yeah, it's, I think I did okay. The narcissist gets one out of the 100 questions right on that test. And then they go to the teacher with a big smile on their face and they hand the paper to the teacher, and they might even say something like, this is going to be the best paper you ever read in your life. And they literally only wrote one letter on that paper. And so the teacher gets the paper and they think, there's got to be something wrong with the way that I assess this student, because there's no way they could be that confident when they turned in the paper. And I think here's something that you have to realize when you're working with a narcissist. They are really, really good at wearing the qualifications of God when they don't meet nearly a quarter of the qualifications. But the tricky
A
part is
quarter,
that
that's pretty good.
yeah, that's actually really good. They don't meet a percentage.
Yeah.
And so the thing that's going wrong is like there's that moment in the teacher's face where he says, wow, like there's got to be something like wrong with me and how I read this paper, because they saw how confident that narcissistic person looked. And that's the very illusion, if you're with a narcissist, that you have to see through. You have to realize that the parts of them that look charismatic and good are a mask that will slowly fade the moment you really start doing the deeper digging into what actually happened. And then once you do that digger deep and you start to realize like, wow, like this is the worst relationship I've ever been in. Why was it that first week was so good? Because that first week, you're getting the polished mask of the narcissist. And one of the biggest things that I'll tell clients is this, that, well, maybe you felt some sense of euphoria at the beginning of your relationship with a narcissist, but that's not just because of the love bombing. That's because you saw God. You saw something that wasn't actually there. You saw someone who's really, really good at, in fact, has specialized probably for the first 30 years of their life on how to become this imitation of something that looks beautiful.
They're very charming. They're very beautifully said. They're very charming.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you spot a narcissist? Just be around them long enough, because it will wear off. And like what you were just saying, their main magic trick is playing reality chicken with you. They're going to give you a shit sandwich, but with a face that says, this is a Michelin star meal. And you're going to eat it going, it is. And it's on you to actually acknowledge, what is my experience in this moment? Is this actually delicious? No, of course it's not. But I'm, as the narcissist, not going to ever acknowledge that. I'm going to stare at you and go, isn't this meal good? And you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a part of you, and okay, so just going into a little bit of like, so that we're talking about like adult relationships, but then one of the deepest wounds of narcissism is the parent-child wound, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the parent-child wound, the narcissistic parent preys upon the deepest reflex we have as mammals, which is we're born early. We cannot survive on our own when we're young, unlike reptiles, which after like 2 weeks are fine, right? So we're born premature. We're completely dependent on these people. And that dependency with a narcissist is preyed upon. And now you willingly delude yourself as the child to believe their reality in order to have your needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And that's deeper than any adult relationship.
Wow. Okay. Say that again. Say that again in a way, because I feel like I caught it, but I want to make sure, honestly.
So so it's like, obviously the idea of attachment is a very mammalian thing. Like, it's not across the entire animal kingdom, because not all animals require complete support when they're an infant. Like, not all animals require that, but we do, because we're not able to protect ourselves when we're babies and infants. And so the first drive we have is not to develop a sense of self internally. It's to develop a sense of interdependence with our caregiver. Like, I need you to survive. So whatever the rules are you're going to give me are the rules I'm going to live by. So an infant and a child of a narcissist is socialized in the narcissistic cult. And their reality becomes so predicated on believing this fake reality that the narcissist creates for their own control, right? And so this is the book that I was reading that I posted that quote on. Basically, right, like when we're babies, we're just pure sensation, we're raw emotion. And when we need something, we cry, and our parent comes and soothes us, and we have this unconditional support, right? Because there's nothing else,
Yeah.
it's just immediate. There's no delay in thinking or whatever.
Yeah.
But then as we get slightly older, all of a sudden we develop a mind that can think and hold things and delay and inhibit our action, right? So now before we make a step in this direction, we go, oh, well, will dad or mom support this step? And what will happen if I what if I do the wrong thing? What if I shit in the corner and I'm supposed to shit in the toilet, right? There are consequences now. So now you delay the part of you that's very raw from expressing itself so that you can get your needs met, right? And so this delaying of your authentic self is for survival. The problem is a narcissistic parent will prey on that, and they will use whatever kind of crazy rules of like, you can't do this, you can't do that, I want you to do this, very controlled. And all of a sudden you abandon the part of you that should have been unconditionally supported, which is your internal drive, your authentic self. Your authentic self has to be suppressed in order to continue to get the support you need to survive.
Yep. Wow. And that just sets you up for a whole life of hell after that. That's just and it's so, it seems so just superficial on the outside, but when you really look at what's actually happening, like, it's so sad.
It's tragic.
It's tragic what happens to the children.
It's tragic because when you're like an adult who enters into a relationship with a narcissist will likely get to a point where they delude themselves into thinking the shit sandwich tastes delicious, right? Because they have to, right? But fold into that, you're not an adult. You're an infant, you're a child. People are 3 times as tall as you. Your entire survival is dependent on them. Now, you don't even need to do much work to delude yourself. You're going to willingly accept whatever reality is thrown at you. And there might be just a little glimmer of yourself left, a pilot light left on of like what your actual needs are.
Yeah.
But it's just so inconvenient to your survival that you start to develop a frustration with the fact that you even have it, right? Like, for instance, if you grow up in a family where your sexuality needs to be straight, and you know that you're going to be disowned if you're not straight, think about how much harder it is to actually even love your sexuality given the consequences.
Yeah. And as you described that, it made me really think, like, it's very, very, and this is why I'm sure it's very likely that if you're the child of a narcissist, that you develop fearful attachment, which is negative view of self and negative view of the world. Because the narcissist is so good at creating a story, a narrative where no matter what reality actually looks like, it's not them that's the problem, but it's you. And so what happens when reality and your authority tells you 2 opposing stories? Well, then you start to live life with the expectation that nothing matters, and there's no way to actually interpret reality, and there's no way to actually know if you're going to get support or not from your caregivers. In fact, intimacy starts to feel like a sword, and a sword starts to feel like intimacy. It's like those things get so flipped, and of course you get fearful attachment. You're questioning yourself. You go outside and you think there's lots of people that are out to get me, and yet I desperately need them. In fact, the moment that I see someone that is good for me, like, that's the scariest thing yet, because I remember hearing lots of stories about how things were good for me and they just came and I think that's deeply connected.
That was really well said. Clip that, put it on TikTok.
Boom.
No, that was really well said. And what you're getting at too is like at the core of the narcissistic child wound is a wound of trust, because the very first thing that you got, the very first thing that got taken advantage of you before you were able to defend yourself was something that you never thought you needed to protect, which is your own safety, your own sense of well-being.
Yeah.
We talking about the fabric of society, right? Like, a child assumes that their parent has their best interest in mind. And so the second they come to the realization that maybe they did not, maybe the parent did not have their best interest in mind, it's like, well, how can I trust anyone then? Like who how am I going to trust someone on that I met from fucking Tinder when I can't trust the person, you know, that raised me? It's like,
Yeah, that's your first taste of what reality looks like as a kid. So
the fearful attachment thing, though, I think if I was in school now, I feel like that would be something I'd study, which is like the relationship between fearful attachment, narcissism, and all that.
Yeah. There's so many connections with all the literature. There's the BPD. There's fearful attachment. There's you're the child of a narcissist.
There's a TikToker that I really like. Shout out to this guy. He goes by the name Hype R Vigilance, the sixth on, on TikTok. But he was saying that, and I really like him because I feel like truth comes from wherever it comes from. He's not like a psychologist, but he's just intuitive and smart. And he was saying that a lot of times a narcissist will create someone with borderline personality disorder. Because someone with borderline personality disorder is basically, they have the empathy to give their supply to the narcissist, but because that trust is so wounded, they develop this real instability in who they are and their relationships with other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because it's like, one, you're a child of a narcissist, so you need endless reserves of empathy and emotions, and you need to be able to read really well in terms of emotions if you're going to survive that life. So you have a huge internal emotional experience that's just constantly being drawn from you, and then you have a huge amount of experience where all of that energy is being invalidated. So it's like that's a recipe for borderline personality disorder, if anything is.
And how can you not empathize with someone like that? I've spoken to a lot of therapists, and some I just think have the wrong view of what BPD looks like, partly because they're just not exposed to it as much as I've been. But like, people with BPD are just, they're often so like misunderstood and sweet, and sometimes they push boundaries, but at the end of the day, they're kind of kind-hearted people that are just holding on to the earth, trying to not fall off. And it's like, how can you not empathize with someone who's gone through so much shit? You know?
Yeah, because with BPD, like, you're pushing boundaries. And I think what's really happening is a lot of people who don't like people with borderline personality disorder are people who had enough privilege in their life to not have their boundaries crossed as much as the person with BPD did. Because when someone with BPD is trying to connect, like you told me one time we were just eating ramen, they are...
Everything's ramen related.
Exactly. They're trying to foster connection because they've had a life where their boundaries have been completely shattered and saving face meant debt to them. And so as a therapist, a lot of times we are people that love to save face. So if you're working with someone with BPD, you're probably going to hate them. But really what's happening is it's actually your own insecurity that's making you not like them, I think.
That is a thought that my wife always accuses me of this. She's like, you've had that thought 50 times. I'm like, yeah, but I used a different word this time. But that is a thought that feels very new and insightful to me, and something that I'd never really heard said that way. But I do think you're right. The people who probably don't have as much empathy for the BPD group are the ones who don't understand what boundary violation feels like on a large scale.
Boom, 100%. Yeah.
Shout out to the BPD clients. You know who you are.
You know who you are. We got your back. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me, this is just selfish, Jacob. I'm going to talk about something else. I wanted to add another thing that was just on my mind. And I think it's this idea that gets people stuck in narcissistic relationships with narcissists. And it's this idea of what we call unconditional love. And so especially Christians who are in relationships with narcissists, they're like, well, my God, Jesus Christ, died on the cross for his enemies. And I can't even sit in this relationship with someone who hurts my feelings. And so as a Christian, are you called to stay in a relationship with narcissists? And I think the first thing to address is that we have a very faulty idea of what unconditional love is. Because a lot of people on the internet, there's so many people that are like dating coaches and all this other stuff that talk about like, well, unconditional love makes you lose respect in relationships. And I think that's a complete lie. I think unconditional love actually breeds respect and mutual love, because unconditional love is not allowing a narcissist to mistreat you. Just like it's not allowing your kid to run in the middle of the street. When your kid runs in the middle of the street, you yell at them, you grab their arm by force, and you say, stop, because I love you. When you're with a narcissist, there's going to be there's a reason you're there, and it's not completely altruistic all the time. You are you are not showing them unconditional love because you suffer through everything that they do to you. In fact, you might even be worshiping them, which is not an altruistic thing to do. What's really happening is you're not showing them unconditional love, but you are feeding into their illusion and showing them the most unkind act that a narcissist could actually experience, which is supporting their delusions. If you want to be kind to a narcissist, you have to help them escape the cage that they've created for themselves. And that's the kindest possible thing you can do. But we get caught up thinking that unconditional love is, I'm going to just let this person keep running over me. And that's the worst thing you can do, because as a Christian, the worst thing you can do is allow something to destroy God's creation and make it suffer. So if you let someone walk over you, then you're allowing them to continually just damage themselves at a sin level, and then others. You tell them, hey, this is wrong. Don't do this. And I think the most altruistic example of unconditional love is actually this. You see your kid, you love them, and they're acting bad, and you just are like, they need to change their behavior, but I just love them so much, and I don't want them to suffer. And every part of your body, everything inside of you wants to tell that kid, like, just have fun. Unconditional love is making yourself get over that feeling and saying, I need to get over my feelings of empathy and just support for this person, and push them down a pit that I don't want to do, and say, hey, you need to not do this today, and I'm disciplining you. And then the kid cries and goes in their room. And then you sit in your room and you feel sad and you cry because you just disciplined your child. And that is the kindest thing you could do for that child. That's unconditional love in relationships.
Kindness doesn't have to be sweetness, you know? And also, like, if you're talking about what it means to be virtuous in any relationship, it's being as authentic as possible. Not authentic in a way that's biting or abrasive, but authentic in a way where how you truly feel is not something you hide. And the reality is narcissistic relationships are predicated on significant conditionality. I'm going to give you this and you're going to give me that. And we're not going to talk about this other thing because then it kind of knocks over the house of cards. Mm-hmm. And so if someone is kind of self-martyring them, if someone is becoming their own martyr in a relationship out of the false virtue of kindness, it's like kindness is not something that's only directed towards your external world. Like, what does kindness look like when it's directed at you? How can you be kind to yourself in a situation where someone's probably forcing you to just be kind to them? You know? Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. I think a lot of people, whether it's religion or some other reason, they will justify staying in a relationship with someone that's narcissistic. But the reality is they are just fearful of the shitstorm that usually comes from breaking things off with them.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's the car alarm when I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. There's always the threat of a shitstorm when you don't give a narcissistic person what they want. And so the second you finally stop accommodating them, because ultimately the relationship is about accommodating their emotional needs without considering your own. Yeah. The second you stop doing that is the second they throw a tantrum. That doesn't mean necessarily that you did anything wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And I would also even add the other side of the coin is a lot of people say, well, I'm staying in a relationship with this narcissist because I'm showing them unconditional love and it's hard for me to not do that. I'm like, that's not unconditional love. Like, unconditional love is going into a relationship that you are actually respected and feel low chemistry. And you just feel an absence of interest in this person. And you are still with them until the end. Like, try not going over the top for the narcissist and try dedicating yourself to someone that is actually kind to you that you feel zero chemistry. And then tell me what you think about unconditional love. Because that's unconditional love. It's the condition with the narcissistic relationship is different. And then also that's the other side of the coin of what you're saying, because there's also the condition of you have to go through the hell of them kicking and screaming when you finally do leave them. So I think there's both there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the question. It's people will jump through hoops to rationalize staying in an unpleasant situation. But at the end of the day, the analogy that I always use with clients is the fruit drops from the tree when it's ripe. You know, as long as you are taking inventory of how you feel and your raw experience of what it's like to be around this person, you're going to get to a point where the unpleasantness becomes so much that there's nothing else you can do but separate from this tree. And there's, you know, this might not be a relevant analogy, but I just love this scene. So there's this movie. I'm gonna give you two things real quick. Okay. There's this movie called I Heart Huckabees. It's a really random movie. Very few people have seen it. But there's this scene where this like kind of therapist-y person is criticizing this main character's mom. The mom is like, he's so ungrateful. I've done everything for him. And the therapist is like, what are you talking about? You might have done material things for him, but the way you treat him, he is an ornament on your tree. And he cannot be his own person and be an ornament on your tree. And that's really, I think, the deepest problem with being in a relationship with a narcissist is you never feel entitled to your own tree. You're really just a shiny object on theirs. And that makes your sense of self-worth so shitty. So that's one. Mm-hmm. And then just another random one, because I just have there's so many depictions of narcissism in media, like the movie The Royal Tenenbaums or the show Arrested Development. But there's this scene in Girls. Girls is just like, maybe like 3 out of the 4 of them are narcissistic. I don't know. It's one of my favorite shows though. Yeah. And there's this scene in Girls where Jessa is with her dad and she's sitting on this child swing next to him. And she is so sad. And she's like, where have you been? Like, he's just all over the place. He never shows up for her. And she's like, I just want to have a relationship with you. Where are you? And he responds by saying, well, where have you been? I've needed you too. Right? And the thing that she says next is probably the most vulnerable thing that anyone can say in that dynamic, which is, I'm the child. Right?
Yes.
But that's the thing with a narcissist, you forget the God-given role that you were supposed to be playing in that dynamic, and it gets replaced by the role they've assigned to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I love that I'm the child, just bringing it right back to reality. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have another question for you. I want to make, but there's another thought I had about like CBT when you said that too, but it's like the fruit isn't, the fruit will fall from the tree when it's ripe. That really stood out to me because that's exactly how I help. So like if somebody's coming to me and they're trying to figure out how to get out of a narcissistic abusive relationship,
you just kick back and go, well, it'll happen.
You just say it'll happen.
You'll get miserable enough.
You have to take small steps. You know, you can just leave if you can, but what I say is build up your psychology. And that really ties in with that fruit analogy, because by build up your psychology, I mean, you know, go on Facebook pages and interact with people who are trying to leave a narcissist, because that's going to feed your thought process over and over and over again, true messages. Feed yourself assertiveness. You know, assertiveness is the practice of putting your needs first before others. You don't have to take the big step of sending that text yet. Maybe you just go for a walk and you take a hot bath and you're moving your psyche over to the left a little bit. And you want to make sure that it inconveniences others in some small way to benefit yourself, and not in a selfish way, because people want you to, because people love you. And so if you do that, if you put yourself before others in just small ways to start, that's going to send a message to your psyche that my wants and needs are important and worth prioritizing, which is a beautiful thought to have.
See, you're so good at this. This is why we work so well together. You are so just like, you just get it. Like it's just you. I could feel you fully, like, just getting it. Like, just the way you talk about it. It's very like you're like touching it with your mind.
Like I'm like,
you're not just thinking things. You're not just like spewing fucking words.
Yeah.
Like you totally are like manipulating it in your head. It's very cool.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I think is happening. Like when you use that analogy, I was really chewing on it and digesting it, and then it shifted to, oh my gosh, yeah, that's exactly what works. And then I was like, yeah, I really feel connected to your analogies. And I mean, like, they're worth chewing on. And I think that, yeah, I appreciate that.
I mentioned the fruit dropping to my mother-in-law on the trip I was just on. The fruit dropping to my mother-in-law. She's a master gardener, which is like a thing where people who are like super good at gardening, it's hard to explain. But anyway, just believe me that that's a thing. She's a master gardener. And I told her the fruit dropping analogy, and she was like, well, you know, the reason the fruit drops. I was like, I had no fucking idea.
You're about to ruin your analogy.
No, it actually kind of reinforces it. She was
good.
like the amount of like sugar that kind of gets like that builds up in the fruit as it continues to ripen,
Yeah.
it starts to give the weight to the fruit, and then the stem that's attached to the branch starts to die as it kind of becomes saturated, as the ripeness happens, and that's how it drops. And I think in a lot of ways that analogy also works, because it's like, okay, so you're still attached to their branch, you're still an ornament on their tree. How do you get to a point where you don't need their supply to feel whole?
Ooh, yeah, it works perfectly. It worked perfectly.
If it didn't work perfectly, I'd still use it. But
Yeah. I got another question for you. I think this is something that people question a lot. But can a narcissist change? Your relationship with a narcissist, and you have hope for them, you love them. Is it possible for them to change?
I think the better question is, what kind of person can change? The only thing that's required for someone to grow is the ability to reflect on the way your behaviors negatively influence others, right? So if you have that capacity, then you have the capacity for change. But if someone says, I'm really willing to change, and then every time you illustrate the ways in which their behaviors negatively influence others, they go, well, they have an excuse or whatever. It's like, well, the proof is in the pudding. I think a lot of times narcissistic people, they are very good with words and they are very bad with actions. The best way to reality test your experience with a narcissist, stop listening to what they're saying and start looking at what they're doing.
Whoa, yeah. Drop that.
Bam. No, but
yeah.
I'm kind of curious your point of view on this, because I feel like that's like such a canned answer, because I've had that thought so many times.
It's a good canned answer.
I know, but it's just like it feels so old to me. So I need something new.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait. Can I ask you it? So it's like I'm asking you. Let's
we'll
get
do
that
the TikTok thing.
vibe.
Yeah.
Well,
let's
give
do
me
it.
the phrasing, and I'll say it to you.
So,
what happens? Okay, let me start. What happens if a narcissistic person, like, or let me rephrase this. Do you think a narcissistic person can ever change?
I think that's a very nuanced question, but I will say I do think they can change. I think what is required though is usually a drastic change. Like they need to sincerely hit rock bottom and realize that they're actually living in a cage. And I think a good follow-up question that comes from that might be, well, I'm with a narcissist. Do I stick around and wait for him to change? I think there has to be a hard boundary. I think this goes all the way back to childhood. And when I think about a narcissist changing, what I think about is a kid that's 5 years old in a grocery store that's yelling because they didn't get to get the candy that they wanted. And yet because they cried loud enough, they were able to get that candy. In the relationship with that kid, in order for that kid to change, if they've been fed the candy for like 5 years, you repeatedly give them experiences like, no, you have to learn to tolerate without having your way. And I think it's the same for an adult with a narcissist, but extreme and tenfold. You have to set a strong boundary. And in the analogy, you're the candy. You have to remove yourself sometimes. And if you're the candy and you stay in the relationship and you make all these excuses as to why they're okay, I think that the most important thing you can do is identify what's the candy in the relationship. What does the narcissist want from you? Cut that off completely. And a lot of times you need years of evidence.
Because they will, and that's the thing. Sometimes narcissists, when they hit rock bottom, they will change temporarily to get you back into their orbit. And then the second you feel comfortable is the second they go back to old ways.
Yeah.
So I feel like the issue with that question, though, is a stupid question. No, I'm kidding. No, but the issue with that question is like, okay, so if a person is saying, hey, should I stay in a relationship with a narcissist? My question to you is, are you capable of listening to your needs? Or even in this question, are you considering their emotional needs to determine what you do, right? Because ultimately, the psychological conditioning that occurs when you're under the abuse of a narcissist is your empathy continually goes in their direction and you consider their emotional needs ahead of your own. And that will even extend to wanting to leave them.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I want to leave them, but do you think that they might be able to change? It's like, well, who cares what I think? What do you want to do in this moment? And if the answer is informed by how they might be impacted, then you're still under their spell.
Yep. I agree. And I think that's why by change, it has to necessarily be that you truly give up on the relationship and you set a boundary and you disappear from it. It's not that, because if you are hanging on to it and waiting for something to happen, you haven't actually left. And like you said, your behaviors are still dependent on their responses. And so what I think actually needs to happen is if you really, really look at it, you'll never get the person that you're with. You have to get somebody new. And by new, I mean either an actual new person or that narcissist actually has to truly have been reborn and to a point where you won't recognize them. And you might not even be attracted to them because the person that they showed you when you met them is not actually a person, you know? So I think it's a takeaway from this that's really hard to not take away can be hold out for them. But I think a takeaway from any time I kind of go over that is you need to truly give up on the narcissist. You can't base your behaviors on them changing. You have to find yourself.
I think it's right. I'll give a more direct answer. I don't think most narcissistic people can fundamentally change because at its core, we're talking about a deficit in cognition, and that cognition is empathy. You know, when someone lacks the capacity to empathize, there are social cognition trainings that try to help people who have neurological issues with empathizing be better at empathizing. Like, for instance, people with autism and people with schizophrenia, in the research, it shows that their ability to just take the perspective of other people is slightly disrupted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can try and train that into people, but at the end of the day, your cognitive capacity is your cognitive capacity. And if you don't really have the capacity to empathize with others for whatever reason, there's really there's really not much room for improvement. You can maybe kind of mimic what it looks like to show concern, but at the end of the day, your difficulty navigating your own shame and your almost disgust. So this is the other thing with narcissistic people tend to have a disgust with vulnerability. There's this feeling of when they watch someone else being vulnerable, they feel this sense of disgust. How could they show that part of themselves? Because deep down, a narcissist believes that if their true self was shown, it would be rejected, right? And so that is why they hate being vulnerable, and they think vulnerability is a character flaw in people who possess it. And so ultimately, in order for them to improve, they would have to continually get more vulnerable, but to continually get more vulnerable would be to reveal what they think is the dark underbelly of their identity. So it's just like...
Yeah. And
not to be negative.
but no, that's real. And I mean, this is not to refute that or anything, but just to continue the sentence, which is, this is why narcissists suffer so much. It's because they don't know how to do vulnerability. And vulnerability is basically the thing that gives people the capacity to both love you and hurt you. The opposite of vulnerability is numbness. It's the callus on your fist after you've punched a bag that hasn't moved hundreds of times. And so what happens when your heart is calloused? Well, you're literally just a walking robot, and you never experience love. You never experience pain, but you only experience nothing. And so that's why narcissists have a bottomless pit of need for affection, attention. That's why they feel so entitled, because they feel like they're not getting anything out of life unless they do that. So it's the vulnerability piece is just missing. It's gone.
It is. And I don't know why, as you were talking, it made me think of like just the religious component of it. I always have to qualify like I'm not religious, but I still like to speak on it because my background is very kind of Catholic oriented. But like, if you look at even the 10 Commandments, there are many of them that are direct refutations of the narcissist lifestyle. Like, for instance, don't lie. Like, do not have false idols. I mean, in a lot of ways, the biggest way you can observe a narcissist in the wild is the false idols that they adorn themselves with, whether it's a trophy wife or a nice car or a fancy watch. This isn't a Rolex. It was $90. I made it on AliExpress. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
It's so embedded in most virtuous cultures and religions because the pitfalls of it are so harmful.
Mm-hmm. And that's part why I believe when I read the Old Testament, everybody's like, well, the law that was given to Moses is so different than what Jesus said, because the law says an eye for an eye. And then Jesus comes along and says, love your enemies. You know, there's this huge disparity. And then there's scriptures that say, well, Jesus did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And so it's like, it's my belief that the Old Testament law is something that was given to people who were drawn towards this idea of narcissism and this lack of human living. Mm-hmm. And so to at least get people the experience of what it means to know what's right from wrong, it's like, do these things, focus on these things as a step-up process so that you can actually use these things. So it's almost like the law is don't cheat on your wife.
You have to walk before you can run.
Yes,
like the Old Testament is very walk, and the New Testament is very run.
Exactly.
And most spiritual and identity development requires you first to feel this sense of structure and rigidity to create a foundation of your life so that then you can take a leap from it. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like a free throw. You got to start robotic, and then you can do it like smooth and flow, right?
Yeah, like the beauty of like a great athlete is that they have such a foundation of fundamentals, and then they transcend it, right? You don't want to get stuck with like for instance, you don't want to get stuck with logging every time a narcissist hurts your feelings and then just stay there. Mm-hmm. And, oh, look at this tally, I'm so valid. It's like, no, you first develop a sense of reality and then you take action from that new sense of reality.
Yeah.
And so the fruit's going to drop when you finally come to the conclusion that this isn't serving you anymore. But if you do, and that's the thing, right? Like when someone says, just leave this person, it's like, I actually really don't consider that a good idea when you're talking to clients about how to navigate a narcissistic relationship. Mm-hmm. I want you to get to the point where leaving feels like the best option for you.
Yeah, I like that a lot because that goes along with the CBT approach, because it's like once the fruit gets ripe enough, it'll drop. And so if you are practicing, like hopefully what your therapist is telling you, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, and you're trying to get out, like if you're practicing assertiveness, you're standing up for yourself in small ways, you're reading books about assertiveness, you're reading about narcissism, you're giving yourself a whole lot of self-love. It's like once you get there, it's going to feel so natural, and you're going to feel angry at the fact that you've been in this relationship this long. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with the anxiety. You're like, oh my gosh, I finally told my boss that I didn't want to stay late, or I don't know why I always use that example. I finally
your boss is you now.
Exactly.
Your boss is Latilbia.
Exactly. I finally spoke my mind, and there was no dust. There was nothing bad that happened afterwards. And then the most important thing to realize is that once you get there, you're going to be so upset at yourself for how long you put up with it. You're like, wow, life could be like this, you know?
It feels like you're escaping from prison. I always look at leaving a narcissistic relationship as the scene from Shawshank Redemption when he finally escapes the prison and he crawls through the sewers and he gets out and it's raining on him and he finally feels free and the shit is washing off of him finally, literally and metaphorically. But like, I think a question that I think a lot of people might have that is something good for us to help with is, what if you're not sure? Like, narcissistic personality disorder is the clinical threshold of the diagnosis, but it also exists on a spectrum. And so what if you're not sure this friend or partner or parent is narcissistic to the point where you have to distance yourself and maybe end the relationship? How do you navigate that uncertainty even after you've collected all of this data?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing I was going to start with is like getting more data on like what is what. Like
What if you have the data?
Yeah.
You have the data, but you still feel a little bit of doubt, and you have all the data you need.
I honestly like going back to what you were saying about the fruit growing. Like, you know, if you are unsure if you're in a narcissistic relationship or not, I would say, of course, continue to analyze them. And if that still leaves you unsure, then start analyzing yourself. How much self-worth do you have? How much self-esteem do you have? Do you struggle with shame? Because shame is the opposite. And, I got something else on that too. But if you deal with a lot of shame and then you start to address that, it's going to naturally squeeze the narcissist out of your life for two reasons. Narcissists are drawn to empaths that fit their beliefs about the world. So if you start to get more confident and have more self-respect, the narcissist is going to slowly grow a distaste for you. Two, you're going to slowly start to grow a distaste for the narcissist because you're going to start to respect yourself, and the narcissist behavior is not going to align with what you're willing to put up with. So I think the more you work on yourself, the more you'll naturally attract the right people into your life. And of course, with discretion, you still want to assess, because it's like you want to get really good at finding people in your life and not accidentally overly judge people, and then not accidentally overly allow people to walk over you too.
That's a really good answer. I think that is the best way to address that problem, because at the end of the day, you have to become miserable enough to actually want to do something about it. And if you're not miserable enough yet, and maybe there's a part of you that's saying I should be miserable enough at this point, then it is probably an issue of self-worth. And your self-worth, I mean, this is something that this book was talking about, which I truly believe too, right? Like they look at unconditional support from the parents as the lever that helps you grow your mind and the complexity of your thoughts and thinking, right? As long as my animal part of me is still accessible and I can go back to it as I continue to socialize and integrate into society, as long as my family lets me still be me, that sense of unconditional support creates in me a self-worth that I can always lean on and rely on when things get tough. When my job is going down the tube and I am about to get fired, let me lean back away from this world of abstract thinking and into my own body, because that's really the thing that is your foundation for living, you know?
Yeah.
And the problem with being in a narcissistic relationship is that you're being constantly asked to ignore the thing that you're supposed to rely on when you're in the direst of straits.
Wow. Yeah. That's the thing, that's fight or flight. You know, that's where you go to determine where to go when stuff goes wrong, and you're losing that. Wow.
And one more thing, you know, there's also, I've noticed there's this common theme of people who tend to have a narcissistic wound, which is they tend to not know how they feel and ask others, should I be worried right now? And the reason they do that is precisely because growing up, they were asked to deny the part of them that could answer that question and rather look towards the figure that should tell them, no, you should not be worried. Should I be upset right now? No, you shouldn't be upset. I'm treating you well. It's like, well, I don't feel like I'm being treated well. But that level of dispossession with your own body will determine how much you're willing to be manipulated.
Yeah, and that's the reason why it's so hard if you have anxious attachment to leave a narcissistic relationship.
Yeah,
because like if you have anxious attachment with a narcissist, then not only there's likely a past history of training yourself to notice the needs of others and to ignore your own, but you're also being trained while you're with the narcissist to ignore your own needs and to focus on theirs. And so there's these repeated experiences of feeling something, looking to the world or the narcissist or other authorities in life, and using that as your answer.
And that's how you develop as an infant, even with non-narcissist people. It's like, like I'm drawing a picture, and I look at mom, I look at dad, I'm like, good?
Yeah.
And they're like,
yeah.
And you're like, oh, you know, like that feedback is essential for your ability to navigate your environment. And so, of course, if that's preyed upon, you're going to
Yeah.
be fucked until you recognize it.
Right. And especially if it's preyed upon rather than nurtured to become your own tool to identify what you want versus don't want.
That's independence. It's fostering independence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The best kind of parenting is when you start off supplying all of their needs and they look to you when they're about to walk off a cliff and you're like, wait, is this thing going to fall or not? But really what needs to happen at a later stage is, you know what? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do this to you. And, you know, as your parent, I'm apologizing because I didn't realize that I stepped over your boundary. Or it also looks like, well, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then leaving it there. And then if they want to do this, it's okay. It's not exactly the contrast what you said, which is, should I feel this way? No. This is a violation to what I want. You know,
It's like, why are you asking someone else how you feel? Because you've been conditioned to, you know, minimize how you feel for the sake of harmony. And at some point, you know, if you have enough awareness, it's the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Yeah,
And like, you know, just to go back to when I asked you the question about like what happens if you still have remaining doubt, I feel like a lot of times this is the hard truth of escaping narcissistic relationships is that doubt is never going to be fully extinguished. It's going to come back in waves. You're going to separate from this relationship. You're going to feel much happier, much better. But every once in a while, that wave of doubt is going to come in. And it's not something to fight. It's not something to resist. It's something to accept as just a natural part of this breaking up. And ultimately, the grief one feels after breaking up a narcissistic relationship is not the grief of losing that person. It's the grief of losing what you thought they were for what they actually are.
nothing to add to that. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're dealing with a narcissist, it's also. Oh no, let me backstep. I wonder if this is even worth a question, but because I feel like it'll be like 0.01% of our viewers. But
No,
like,
I like those.
what
Let's alienate 99%.
what if you are a narcissist and you're listening to this? What advice do you have for narcissists? Go get Jesus.
Y'all need Jesus.
You'll need Jesus, son.
There's an almond-based dip at the farmer's market that it's called. Oh, my wife loves it. It's called Y'all Need G Sauce or something. It's like
that.
it's something like that. And
I
it's
thought you
these
were
Christian guys. They're super nice.
Oh my god.
And they're like really good, and it's just a really good dip. So plug Y'all Need G Sauce, or I think it's something like that.
That's what you do if you're a narcissist. Go get some of that.
Go
G-sauce.
get some of that almond dip.
Try it. It's really good.
I think that if you're a narcissist, what you need to understand is the wounds that you're causing to the people around you is not a permanent wound if you can validate that it's there. And if you really want to put your actions to your words, acknowledge the hurt you're causing and take accountability for the role you're playing in it. And once I'm guilty of doing what I say other therapists do, which is just like, hey, just do this thing. Hey, you're anxious? Don't be anxious. Meditate. Take an ice bath every day. No, but what I'm saying is like when you make that intention of I'm going to start taking more accountability in my life, the likely next thing that's going to happen to you is your sense of shame is going to be triggered, because the second you start to reflect on the negative impact you're causing others is the second you're going to start to feel like shit. And the reality is you need to recalibrate that instrument by feeling a little bit like shit for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if you're a narcissist watching this, you need to really realize that you're missing out on life, and that you need to start realizing that accountability is good. That you need to start realizing that eating 5 pounds of sugar is not going to make you happy, but you need to eat your meats, your vegetables,
Your almond dips.
your almond dips. And I mean, that's the best thing of life. And that's why you're so jealous of empaths. That's why you're so jealous of people that are authentic. It's not because they're luckily just making it in life and there's something strange going on and they're strangely naive and not paranoid. It's that your barometer is off, and seek help. And it's not going to feel good at first because you're going to feel like you're missing out. But realize that feeling of missing out is not accurate. your compass is off, and it'll slowly shift as you start getting new life, and you start to just overwhelmingly cry in private as you're starting to build real relationships for the first time.
It's going to be painful. And you know, at the end of the day, here's the beauty of what you said with the 0.01%, right? Like the people who are diagnosable narcissists are a very small percentage of the population. It's like 2% or something. I don't know, like 2-3%. But so yes, you probably feel quite alien-like because there's so few of you in the world. But at your core, the issue is you feel like there's something wrong with you, and that is the most unifying human experience one person can have. So in a lot of ways, the second you start accessing that feeling and stop fighting it is the second you enter into communion with the rest of society, right? But then then the other thing I want to say is, like, I think it's very important for people to understand, right? Like, narcissism is a really big buzzword right now, but the reality is very few people are diagnosable narcissists. The flip side of that, though, is the negative impact a narcissistic person has on their social environment reverberates to such an extent that they are felt. Almost everyone knows a narcissist, you know, whether it's someone you work with or someone in your friend group or someone in your family. Anytime you hear of a sports team and there's a locker room cancer, right? Like, these people exist and their impact is far reaching. So just because they're quite a minority in terms of diagnosable narcissists doesn't mean that you haven't been significantly impacted by one.
Yeah, I agree.
We ran out of steam.
Let's see how much
We've
time
got 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Well, something I also want to make sure I say is, if you are in a relationship with a narcissist, you know, there's a lot of crisis resources and things like that. And another caveat to keep in mind, which is, if you're in a narcissistic relationship and you are trying to stand up for yourself, make sure that you stand up for yourself with 2 feet. You know, if you go into it and you call for support and you in any way are trying to cover up the mess of your narcissistic partner, you could end up being the one in trouble. So if you are trying to get out and you're trying to deal with things, I would really highly recommend that you fight like hell. You know, you stand on 2 feet and you say, this is completely unfair, even though everything inside of you is telling you it's maybe I'm wrong. You know, wipe that guilt away, because that guilt is a lie from a voice that you learned from childhood that is an overload of empathy. Like, really just go into it and step in and say, this is completely wrong and I am right. Like, and notice how that feels when you say I am right. Like, does it feel weird? Because that is creating order from chaos. And so there's a problem if creating order from chaos feels weird to you. So keep going that way. That's a very Christian thing too, making order from chaos.
No, I know all the Christian shit.
Yeah, I hear, like, I see through you.
I study Christians. I go to church with a notebook.
But all of them do.
I'm like, this one's going to hell. No, but what you're saying is so true, and I think what is so scary about a narcissist, someone who is in the throes of abuse of narcissism, something that's so scary is knowing that you have to stand alone, that you have to own how you feel, and that you're going to go up against a harsh narrative that paints you poorly. And the most healing thing you can do is stand up in a crowded room with the possibility of no one believing you and owning how you feel, because that's the most vulnerable thing you can do. Hey, I don't like the way I'm being treated, and I don't care what words you say to manipulate my reality. I know at my core, I'm going back to my pure animal raw sensation of experiences telling me this is not cool, and I don't fucking care what you have to say.
Beautiful. Yeah. Because, I mean, you are going outside of the room where you've been constantly told that who's going to believe you. So, yeah, fight against that, because that's probably what you're saying, right? Like, in court, you're probably like, oh my gosh, am I going to look crazy?
Yeah, look crazy. And I think the deepest way someone can build confidence is not needing other people to affirm their experience. You know, your experience is true because it's true, not because someone witnesses it.
Yeah.
You're the witness. You're the only witness you need. But yeah, I mean, I think we could talk endlessly about this, but we are brushing up against time.
Yeah, I was like, boom, I was about to start going into shame. But we don't need to.
You want to do plugs? I feel like what we should do is like talk about like our business. Like if you want to,
Yeah.
I've had a couple, people reach out. So we're both practicing therapists. I have some availability currently in my private practice, but so if you'd like to reach out to me, go ahead and do that. The one thing though is you have to live in California because I'm only licensed in California.
Yes.
But if
So
you
many
live in
people.
California, fucking reach out and I'll heal all of your problems. First 2 sessions guaranteed. Otherwise, you can sue me.
Yeah. Please don't sue us. All of this is for educational purposes only. Don't use this to try to heal your. Seek professional help. I always say that after every post. But also, I'm at Restore Psychology. I just opened up this practice, and my wife will be joining soon, who's also a psychologist. I do mostly. I specialize in doing Christian counseling, assertiveness training. I really specialize. I should say this even more so. Attachment, that's like my stuff, and Jungian shadow work. So we have a physical practice in San Diego, Mission Valley.
Just opened your office. Beautiful office.
Thank you.
Don't you guys want to sit on his green couch?
It's cool, man. Check out our website to see the photos. We're about to if it's past March 25th, then the photos should be up on our website. So if you're watching this past March 25th, check it out.
It's like 2030, like there's been an apocalypse and someone's like, I wonder if it's up.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. What's our next topic? You know our next topic.
Ooh, I'm between ADHD. What was the other thing we mentioned? We said ADHD and something else. We had 3 things.
Oh, that was the only thing I can remember.
We'll just make it.
We should give them like a poll. But anyway.
Yeah, comment below what you want us to talk about next. We ignored everybody that said ADHD by attachment, but that's something that's going to be in the ADHD episode, which is coming up soon. So
yeah, that might be next.
We are listening.
All right, well, thanks, guys.
Thanks. Peace.